The following program does not necessarily represent the views and opinions of Reality Radio 101, its advertisers and sponsors, or its listening audience. Listener discretion is advised. Welcome to the Bear Psychology Radio Show with psychologist, author, and speaker, Dr. Anna Baranowski, where mind, mood, and what matters to you are discussed. We're broadcasting live from Toronto, Ontario, Canada, on Reality Radio 101. Our email address is instudio101@gmail.com. And now, your host of the Bear Psychology Radio Show, Dr. Anna Baranowski.
Hi, everyone. I'm so glad to be with you back again today. We are live, and I am excited for our conversation. We've got Richard Brouillette with us, and he is the author of Your Coping Skills Aren't Working, How to Break Free from the Habits That Once Helped You but now hold you back. And I think that's a pretty great title because it's really what a lot of people really struggle with, kind of the stuff that you got shaped by that continues to impact you every single day and undermine your ability to actually get on with the things that you think are most important in your life. And isn't that something worth focusing on for all of us? Because I don't think there really is anybody who doesn't have something that's holding them back or some element of their lives that interferes with feeling a sense of freedom, connection, creativity. You know, we all struggle with these things. And I think probably for most people, it's kind of a lifelong goal to continue working on yourself. And, you know, I really encourage everybody to figure out ways to work with the things that are holding you back in life. I love to think about life as a forward-facing trajectory. You know, what are the ways in which you can feel like you are living this purposeful life that you're meant to live? And that isn't always about, you know, complex things. Sometimes it's just about simple things like having a quick conversation with somebody and feeling comfortable in your own skin, you know, being able to engage in a new hobby, or, you know, move forward in a career or education that interests you. And sometimes, you know, when we have these kind of early belief structures or self-limiting beliefs, then they hold us back from really being the people that we want to be. And Richard is here to help us with that. As you know, I want to encourage everybody to email in and join the conversation. Richard is here to help us understand ourselves a little bit better today. And, you know, it's instudio101@gmail.com. Please do connect with us throughout the show. We are happy to talk to you and have you part of the conversation. Richard, welcome.
Thank you, Anna. It's great to be here. Thanks for inviting me. And hello to all the listeners and viewers. I can't wait to talk to everybody.
Yeah, we have some really, really engaged and pretty interesting listeners who often send us the most compelling questions. So I'm hoping it'll be a great conversation today, as it often is. You know, I'm just wondering, you know, we're talking about something that I think is fairly universal, this idea of a maladaptive early maladaptive schemas. I know that's really what your work is based on, and seems to be based on, work that came before you, the work of Wendy Beharry, and I think it's Johnston and some others who were really the founders, or
Yeah,
Jeffrey
and
Young
Jeffrey
and
Young.
Janet Klosko, who are really the founders of this work. But you've kind of taken it up in your new book, Your Coping Skills Aren't Working. Like, how did you arrive at this? There's so many different paths a person can go when they're doing a counseling practice. And I know that's really what you do.
Yeah, it's a great question, and it gets to the question for me always of what works in the therapy that I do with my clients, and I'm always really drawn to thinking about it in new ways and bringing freshness and creativity into the process. So a few years ago, I was really figuring out how to work with folks who have personality disorder traits. And those are much more challenging, severe, disruptive states of mind or emotional states, narcissistic personality disorder, borderline personality disorder. And schema therapy was mostly well known for being one of the more effective models for working with personality disorders, up there with dialectical behavior therapy. So you might see it if you're reading your Healthline or some online mental health news. You might see a reference to it in the context of personality disorders. But what I found is folks who are struggling with more severe mental health issues, they're just like the rest of us in the sense that you have states of mind that undermine you, or that get in your way, or conflicts with yourself, that make doing what you want to do harder in your everyday life. And so I started to work on applying some of these principles, and it's much more adapted now among schema therapists to work with all sorts of folks, just like what I do. But I worked on adapting that for a popular audience. And Jeff Young wrote a book a couple decades ago now, that popularizes schema therapy. And I kind of adapted my book and updated it for a contemporary audience, including some of the new information in the book. But the other thing is I found it really exciting and creative and fun, and it has an openness to it as a model where they call it an integrative model. So you can bring in whatever works, other kinds of tools. It's kind of like a toolbox. So one of the aspects of schema therapy is that you do chair work, where you might have someone look at an empty chair and imagine it's, a person in their life or a part of themselves, and have a dialogue. And we call that chair work. It's based on Gestalt therapy. Imagery rescripting, which is working with an image in your mind. And this comes from trauma therapy, right? Start with an image in your mind that tells a bit of a story, and then change the ending. And that actually has an impact from a neuropsychology perspective. It actually changes our brain when we talk to ourselves or change the endings of images in our mind. Those are a couple of the practices that I found so exciting to get involved in. And then once I started employing these with my clients, it was exciting for me. It was exciting for them. It becomes much more experiential in the session. You're re-experiencing emotions, which helps you change them more than just talking about them. And sometimes talk therapy is appropriate, but when you're working on really changing a deeply ingrained experience or a tape loop in your head, you want to re-experience it with a therapist, or, in some of the exercises in my book, so you can change it. All right.
So Richard, I want to go back.
Yeah, I said a lot.
You did. You said a lot. I want to go back to a couple of things that you said that I think are really important, because they're difficult to work with for clinicians, but also when people struggle with personality disorders, which are really, they're different than, let's say, something like a depression or anxiety, because these are not easily changeable, interactive strategies that people get stuck in their lives, that lead them to really struggle in their relationships in general. So, you know, when you start working with personality disorder, what you're really working with is something that is not very malleable. It doesn't change easily. So what you're saying, Richard, is that using the schema therapy approach, these skills that you teach people, you're starting to get at rigid personality or behavioral structures that really steal from people and undermine their ability to have meaningful relationships. Because anybody who either has a personality disorder and recognizes it, or is in a relationship with somebody with a personality disorder, can get into big trouble in their relationships. So that's one piece that I want to kind of pick up. But I also want to ask you, what kind of you know, when you think about this whole concept of a schema, let's start with helping our listeners understand what this thing of a schema actually is. Could you explain that?
Yes, it is a schema is what originally was called a maladaptive schema. I call it more of a coping schema or a reactive schema. The language in mental health is always changing. We're always improving it. But the idea that when we are born and we grow up into an attachment situation in our family, right? However we relate to the people taking care of us that we depend on, we adapt to their world at an emotional level and a thought level. And that adaptation, the brain is very, very clever and smart about getting an imprint of what to expect. How is this? What are the rules of this relationship? What is my role in this relationship? How do I feel about the way the world works? What I might expect from the world? And these can get imprinted in our brain just as much as the ability to understand where sounds come from. Or my favorite is the notion of object permanence, that if you hold up something in front of another object, you still know that behind the thing obstructing it, the object is still there. So it feels like the rules of how the world works in a very deep way.
When you think about it,
yeah.
So when you think about it through that lens, and you realize that people can get really stuck in their relationship because of rules that they picked up when they were just children.
That's right. And they are very much ingrained in our thought process and are part of our thoughts. And so when you're first aware that you have a maladaptive schema or a way of reacting to the world with these laws or rules, it may come across as intuitive at first, but you realize later that it starts causing friction with people, with the world, with yourself, right? That it makes life harder, but you start to see that maybe there's a pattern in my thinking here, or the way I react with anger, or the way I feel like my partner is not listening to me, or I had this really intense feeling that my partner didn't care about how I felt at that moment. And I know that he does care, but somehow I really believed in that moment that he doesn't at all. And I reacted, right? Mm-hmm. So, and the schema may be dealing with a parent who is more emotionally detached, right? So you learn a rule about that, or you learn to keep your mouth shut because saying how you feel is going to get punished or ignored. So you want to protect yourself from being hurt. So one of the rules you might learn is, okay, I don't talk about how I feel. Next thing you know, you're an adult and it's hard to tell people how you feel because you're still operating with this schema. All right. So one of the key elements of schema therapy is going from understanding that we learn these rules as children, like the rule for living, if you're dependent on someone else and you don't have power, right? Your parents, your caregivers are the ones that make all the decisions in your life. It can get uncomfortable to think about how powerless a child can be, right?
For sure.
Um, so you're operating with those rules, but then you become an adult and you're in a world where you're in charge now, right? So you
But you've
don't
still
need
got
to live.
the childhood
That's
brain.
right. That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
Mhm.
And those are what we call schemas. And they are kind of like, you can think of them like um, software that keeps running, even though you don't need it anymore.
That's
And it
beautiful.
influences your reaction.
I love that imagery
Mhm.
because it makes so much sense. And you know, when you think about this idea of software, it's not hardware. Like it, you know, we can actually change this, but the program is still running. And the attachmentproject.com has a great blog called Early Maladaptive Schemas for our listeners who want to know more about early maladaptive schemas and how they might particularly kind of give you some insight into your life. There are 5 domains and 18 early maladaptive schemas. And I
Yeah.
want Richard to help us with that because these 5 domains are really, really interesting. There's disconnection and rejection. The second one is impaired autonomy and performance. The third one, impaired limits. The fourth one, other directedness. And the 5th domain is overvigilance and inhibition. And within each of the 5 domains, there are a number of maladaptive schemas that relate to that domain. And, you know, there are a couple of ones. I've been working with this maladaptive schemas content and chart for a while, Richard. And the thing that I find very interesting is that I do a lot of work with professional helpers, you know, doctors and
Uh-huh.
clinicians, nurses, and different people who are in the world in a helping role. And I have just had such an interesting time with this because almost
I love
immediately,
it.
I know, almost immediately what I get is, can you guess which ones come up more often than others?
Unrelenting standard schema.
Oh, yes, that would come up and
Hmm.
also self-sacrifice, subjugation.
Hmm. That's
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Self-sacrifice. Anyone who is in the helping field is likely to have self-sacrifice schema.
Yes.
That's for sure.
Yeah, yeah.
Um,
So I did this on the attachment project. They have a couple of interesting scales and measures, and there are a number of different scales and measures that you
yeah.
could look at online. But just looking at it and reading the descriptions, you can start to figure out where you might land. And
Yeah.
of course, you know, I'm like really high on the self-sacrifice as well. And it's like, it's just so predictable.
Yeah.
It's so predictable, depending on the kind of work that you do, right?
That's right. Yeah, exactly. Um, I also on my webpage, I have a whole guide to all the schemas and a link to a Psychology Today blog that I do. So I'll have 1,000 word or so Psychology Today post about each of the schemas that you can link to on my website.
Oh, if you would please provide that for us, I'll have my team put that up on the
Okay,
website
great. The
for blog.
website is self-talk-therapy.com. Self-talk-therapy.com. And there are questionnaires that really are quite effective. You know, if you're a schema therapist, you take them yourself and do the evaluations. And a schema therapist will also do those questionnaires with their clients as part of the process, if it's appropriate. Um, Anna, I know you clearly have done your homework, which is very impressive. So there's 18 schemas, 5 domains. One of the things I do in the book is for a fairly short self-help book, right? There's a ton of moving parts in schema therapy. We haven't even gotten into the concept of modes yet, right? Which is really, I think, where the exciting change happens. So the way I look at it, I was thinking about this yesterday. Schemas are kind of like little bits of thoughts. So unrelenting standard schema might be the thought, I need to work harder, this isn't good enough. And imagine just having that be a reaction that goes through your mind about everything you do or most things you do, right? And the challenge of letting that feeling go. If you're someone with this schema, And I work with folks, they freak out about showing up on time. They can get kind of obsessive. And part of the work that we do is tolerating not listening to that schema voice.
That
What
is
are
the
the
hardest thing to
yes.
do. That is
Yep.
so hard to do. And, you know, I'm talking now to our listeners because, and I want to say something to our listeners about that. So I'm working on a book right now, Richard, and I had to submit something for review. I'm in the process of writing the second chapter for submission. And one of the things that almost immediately happens as I have to do that is I don't want to submit it because it's like I'm telling myself, oh, this really isn't up to the grade. You know, this is not good enough, right?
Yep.
And that is an automatic thing. It happens to most people who are creative. So I want everybody to know, if you're listening to this, don't think that just by looking at your schemas, you're going to get rid of some of the things that you might struggle with, but it's bringing it up and actually seeing it in the light of day and recognizing yourself with some compassion. Can you talk a little bit about that, Richard?
I love the compassion piece. And yes, and I want to say to listeners, think of something that you're trying to change that's hard. It could be anything. I mean, I'll challenge you. Think of something that is really getting to you and you want to change. And if you want email or call in or email and see if we can figure out what schema might be there or what mode might be operating and how you might handle it. We can do it in, fairly quickly. Okay.
So before people start to jump into
Yeah.
that now, because we've missed this little piece.
Yeah.
Talk to us about modes, because that's something to really understand, and I think that would be really helpful.
But the compassion piece, as you said, where are we going with all of this? I really liked what you said at the beginning of the show about building a fulfilling, rich life where you're able to accomplish the things that you want to do, right? That's the final chapter of the book is about that. Let's say, and this is a pretty radical question, let's say that you're able to change your behavior in ways that really allows you to stop the friction and accomplish things. One of the things I have with my clients is they realize, well, wait, what do I do now? I had devoted so much energy and frustration and time to all of these problems that as they start to go away, I'm less burdened. I have more time. And you have to start thinking about what you want to do with your life. And it might raise different questions. If I don't have performance anxiety anymore, am I really a musician then? Am I a performer? Maybe I am. I don't know. So, and part of the fact of getting to that place is having compassion for yourself and understanding that your triggers, your schemas are not who you are, that there's more to you than just these reactions. Okay. And that's where we go with modes. So what I think about is schemas are these little pieces of reaction or dysfunction or disruption that we experience, right? Self-sacrifice, I have to do this for others, unrelenting standards, negativity is another big one. I'm going to react to all these situations as a pessimist, so I protect myself from getting hurt if my hopes are disappointed, right? Anyway, so all of these little bits of schemas, some of them kind of pair up like cells getting together with forming a bigger organism. And I think of it like ingredients in a dish. If you're making a soup and the soup might be feeling bad about being an artist and having writer's block, then it might have that unrelenting standards and self-sacrifice schema and a negativity schema all inside that one mode of having writer's block, all right? So the modes are really what happens when the schemas start to form little groups together in your mind and in your heart as you get older. So they become a more complicated way of relating to the world. And what I like to think of it is as a version of yourself that is like a very different part of the self. That's a mode, all right? So one of the famous ones people like be familiar with from a lot of different schools of thought, the inner critic. Internal family systems is a really close sibling of schema therapy. with the idea that the self is in parts, right? So where does the inner critic come from, right? It plays a role in childhood, which then later in adulthood, you might think it helps you perform well or do really high quality work. The reality is you're actually just a smart person who has high standards, who doesn't need to feel so bad about themselves. The inner critic isn't necessary to have to accomplish things, all right? But it just makes you feel lousy. I like to say, if you met someone who talked like the inner critic, if you met someone like that at a party, you'd be like, what's wrong with this person? I don't like being around them, right? But they're in your head.
Yeah, yes, and we see that a lot, and that is the truth, that, you know, if you would pay attention to the negative things that you say to yourself habitually, you wouldn't want to have a friend like that in your life, exhibiting that kind of behavior. And yet we tolerate that from ourselves. And this is different than just being able to say, hey, I want to do some reflection on how I handled something. What are the ways in which I might be able to improve on that? Can I do that a little bit better? Can I polish this? Can I work on that skill? And that's one thing, but it's a very different thing to really beat up on yourself and just feel worse and worse, which actually impairs your performance overall. I want to start bringing in some of our questions because I've got a whole bunch of them.
Let's do it.
Okay. Oh, well, this is interesting. Hi, Francis. Thank you so much for writing in. Francis says, hello, Dr. B. Self-help therapy sounds like someone is nuts talking to himself. Am I wrong, Richard?
Francis, I love that question, and I get it all the time from my clients. And here's the thing, Francis. The way I put it, some of the biggest problems human beings have is believing that they are totally self-aware and what they say and think is really what they say and think, and that they think in one voice. And trouble happens that brings people to therapy. It causes anxiety and depression when you get so caught up in your particular moods or thoughts that you think that's all there is, and that's all there is to who you are. And the more that you can appreciate having, this is a key phrase, multiplicity of mind, that there's a part of the self who thinks one thing or reacts one way, who is different from how you might actually want to identify yourself. So in fact, in my book, I'll take the reader, I'll help you through the whole process of figuring out your schemas and then also figuring out what modes you have. I have chapters that are devoted to that. I make it really user-friendly. So you can kind of figure out what parts you have. And then the most mentally well-adjusted and healthy person is able to appreciate and accept different parts of the self, with compassion and without the struggle, right? That inner struggle of fighting a thought that you don't like or a part of yourself you don't like, right? So the short answer to your question is it does not mean you're nuts. It means that you're really resilient. There's a stigma around mental health, right? We see schizophrenics who are organically having hallucinations, right? And medication helps with them, but organically in terms of the structure of their brain. Very different from the voices that we experience ourselves in our personality every day, all right? You can think about, there's movies about this. Frozen is a great movie. There's movies about the different parts of the self. There's the concept of the inner child, right? The idea that we have this core part who feels really strong emotions and has particular emotional needs, who may not be getting the attention that they need from our adult self. Another very common and very, very effective way of understanding the self. So I hope that answers your question. If it doesn't, email me and I'll give you a very bespoke answer. Go ahead.
Here's another one.
Yes.
And this is really in a nutshell, I think you've been covering it, but can you give this reader a nutshell answer? What is schema therapy? And that comes from Tom. Thank you for your question, Tom.
Tom, great question. Keeping it real, bringing it down to the simple way to look at it. It's a way of helping someone understand their triggers, the things that come up automatically, how those create states of mind that cause us trouble, and then how we can develop a sense of the self that we want to be, our ideal self. I call it the healthy, caring adult part. And work out ways to have a dialogue with ourself to change our behavior.
I love
So,
that description, Richard. And I
thank you very
love
much.
that you brought in this concept of the healthy, caring adult. And I believe that's one of the modes, isn't it?
I call it a mode. It's definitely a part of the self we can be when we're at our best, right? When we're not sitting in traffic, freaking out with anger or frustration, and that inner critic is like giving us a hell of a time. When we're able to feel grounded, when we're not feeling controlled by our feelings, when we're able to really feel confident and safe and secure and accepting of ourselves. That's a healthy, caring adult. So Tom, thank you it's a very simple question, and I love that question.
You know, it's interesting because this whole concept of the healthy, caring adult and when we really need it is actually times when maybe things aren't really going as well as you might hope them to go. And you really need to have this part of yourself well established and practiced. How would somebody practice that so that it's available when they really need it?
It's a little bit like being an ideal parent to yourself. So and I talk about that in the book. It's like playing a kind of reparenting role. And I'm not saying act like the way your parents were, because that can be the inner critic, but the ideal parent that you need for yourself. Sometimes it's playing that authority role. And the way I think of it is, it's kind of like, think about who's driving the bus right now. If I am feeling really defeated and really down on myself, like I'm flawed, I'm a bad person, I don't deserve people's attention, I might be in a more like a compliant surrender mode, a part which is much more passive, right? That mode is driving the bus, or the inner critic is driving the bus. And you want to think about, what does it take for the healthy, caring adult to drive the bus? They're going to talk to the inner critic and say, you're not helping right now. We really don't need you telling us how we messed up, how we're always messing up and we're never going to get it right. Well, if that's true, then how is this helping us? It's not making me feel any better. It's okay to make mistakes. It's okay to have challenges. I can accept that. And the best way to go is to not be down on myself and continue driving the bus myself and put the inner critic in the back seat. All right. And it's practicing doing that. That's the key. Practice, practice, practice. So in my sessions with my clients, I'll have them write a little diary card. When did it happen during the week? What happened? And then we'll practice it, and we'll do a little rescripting, or we'll do role play. And I might model, how would your healthy, caring adult have sounded then? And then I'll try to talk a little bit. And then it becomes, they adopt their own style of doing that. And it takes a little practice. But over time, you really start to internalize that voice. You know, it's very common for clients to say, I hear my therapist's voice in my head. I was doing this and I heard my therapist, saying something, whatever. You should have used your analog clock if you're ADHD, whatever. Well, it's kind of the same thing with developing a healthy, caring adult. You start to hear that point of view or that voice in your head, if that makes sense. So
I just love that, because I see how that can be what I like to call a positive interruption, because you know, we have these really kind of chronic negative internalized voices, and then we have practiced a positive, healthy, caring adult. I can see that being this really fantastic positive interruption model where, you know, we can evoke that because we've practiced it often enough, and that is really a beautiful thing to be able to do. I have another one. This is from Darlene, who is asking how many schemas there are. Now, we did cover this just a little while ago, but I'm going to actually read each of the 18 because I want to have Richard maybe pull out a few of them and, for example, show us how the healthy, caring adult might address one of these or a few of these maladaptive schemas. And there's a description in Richard's book, Your Coping Skills Aren't Working, for each of these 18 maladaptive schemas. And it's really worth getting the book because the descriptions and the explanations of, you know, how to address it or how it might look are really, really helpful. So, abandonment, mistrust abuse, emotional deprivation, defectiveness, shame, social isolation are all part of domain 1, disconnection and rejection. Dependence, incompetence, vulnerability to harm or illness, enmeshment, undeveloped self, failure, those are all part of domain 2, impaired autonomy and performance. Entitlement, grandiosity, insufficient self-control, self-discipline are part of domain 3, impaired limits, which, you know, really overlaps with narcissistic tendencies. The next one is subjugation, self-sacrifice, approval, recognition seeking, which is domain 4, other directedness. And as I had said before, that one seems to really be connected quite often with people who go into helping professions. So, you know, anybody who's a helper listening today, you might want to just kind of take it in stride that, you know, the reality is that there are some drivers that you have. And although it is a beautiful thing to be a helper and to help others, you know, that has to be something you are aware of, that you're not just putting yourself constantly last, because that's not okay. And then finally, negativity, pessimism, emotional inhibition, unrelenting standards, and punitiveness, which is overvigilance and inhibition. Richard, which are your favorites?
My favorites. I think it's an interesting question, favorites, because while we can help change the role of these schemas in our lives, right, reduce their power over us and get them to a point where they're not disrupting our lives, they're not really ever going to go away, kind of like being a human being never goes away. But they also, we can start to appreciate the sides of them that do things for us or that helped us get where we are. These schemas all helped us survive our childhood and get through tough times, right? However privileged a life you lived or whatever, we all have moments with emotional challenges in one way or the other. And our schemas are our brain's brilliant way of getting us through it. So I'm gonna get out of that question and say they're all my favorite. But
okay, but wait a minute. I'm not going to let you go on that one because that's too easy, Richard.
Yeah.
So I have to challenge you here. How about this one? Let's say enmeshment and undeveloped self. What might somebody, I just picked that randomly, everybody. What might somebody with enmeshment and an undeveloped self say to themselves habitually?
I am so worried about what my partner feels or needs, and I'm really trying to make sure that I'm living up to it. And I'm feeling really anxious that I did an okay job of pleasing them or keeping them happy. And I keep wondering when they're not around, are they okay? Or that text, that exchange didn't quite go quite so right. I could really use some confirmation that they're okay and that I was okay in that last exchange.
Whoa,
And
this is a little bit exhausting, isn't it? I mean, the idea that, you know,
yeah,
you're chronically focused on the other person. What would the healthy, caring adult need to say, or what does this person need to integrate in terms of new language embodied in this healthy, caring adult? What would need to be said? What needs to be interrupted with this enmeshment undeveloped self?
that's great. And I want to point out what we're doing is translating these concepts into speech, right? I said, here's what you say in your head with enmeshment schema. I'm worried about whether that text went okay. I feel anxious about if they approve of what I did and I'm keeping them happy, right? It's the voice of a person. And so the voice of a healthy, caring adult might say something like, you know, that part of the way you grew up with your parents was you didn't get enough attention. And it left you feeling really insecure about making your mother happy because she had her own problems. And so we know you're worried about making people happy, right? And we know that you are good enough, and that when you worry about whether your partner's happy or whether that text was okay, it tends to cause trouble in the relationship. You might bug them, right? They need you to feel just as secure about yourself as you need that. So, what would it be like to really focus on being enough, taking that for granted and knowing that it's true? How's the rest of your day going to go? What do you want to do this morning?
Well, that's a great redirect, because as soon as we start living our lives through ourselves instead of somebody else, it certainly changes the dynamic of a relationship. Unless we're in a codependent relationship, and then that won't go so well necessarily. Because
And
if you are in a codependent relationship, you're certainly going to find that your partner, on some
yes,
level, actually wants you to continue with your
that's right.
immaculate relationship.
Or if you're in a relationship with a narcissistic person, that's
And
right.
exactly, exactly. What
Yeah.
about the self-sacrificing person? What might a self-sacrificing person say? And let's start with that part.
All I can think about is how this person is doing and whether they need my help, or I'm worried about their problems. And I really need to do a better job helping them and work really hard on taking care of these people in my life. And I can have lunch later or go to the gym later. I'm really busy and I need to take on more work helping the people in my life that need my help. And I'm going to look at the ASPCA ads on TV and feel really bad about the animals, which I do. And I'm going to think about adopting another dog, or I'm really worried about that. And it never ends, right?
But what
Sometimes.
about the healthy, caring adult? What kind of language might be brought on board?
Um, it's putting it in context. I know you feel worried about other people's welfare and being able to help them, and that's great. It's a wonderful thing about who you are. We also know that you can take it too far to the point where you suffer, and then you're not the person that you want to be, or the person you need to be in order to be strong and live the life you want to live. So it's okay to care for others and want to help them. It's a wonderful thing about you. And it's okay to set limits because it's good for you. And maybe the people you're trying to help need to see that you have limits. You can show them what it's like to be a person with boundaries, right? So there's a
Beautiful.
lot of ways that self-help is caring for others too.
I love the new languaging. Let's go back to some of the questions. We've got so many. I'm not sure we're going to get through them all. This is from Rita, and she says, has your guest ever met Jeff Young?
Yes. I did some training with him. So I spent some time with him and, did some webinars with him. And he's a very kind, very devoted, brilliant person. Yeah.
Beautiful. And this one is from Ken, who says, hello today. A very interesting topic today. Is exercise a part of schema therapy?
Complicated question, Ken. Now, I don't know whether you mean physical exercise or doing exercises, but I'll try to address both. Yes and yes. The exercises are practicing that self-talk. And one of my favorite exercises, something I do all the time, I notice, okay, so exercise can also, like physical exercise, I'll speak for myself. I'm always trying to squeeze a lot in my day, right? I have schemas, let's face it. Sometimes what I'm trying to squeeze in my day, I end up working out less than I want to, or my inner critic or my unrelenting standards tell me, and I have to tolerate the anxiety I feel about that. It's okay. I'm making choices about what I want. I can be in an abundance mentality. There are many things that I want and I can have them, but I can't have them all at once. So that might be an exercise I do, right? I might have to do it every day when I don't do the full workout I want. I'm going to practice how I talk with the parts of myself. And one of the things that I do is I call it a mode dialogue journal, where I might, like I'm writing a screenplay, I might write, here's what my inner child is saying. I feel really bad about myself, like inadequate for not doing that. And then my inner critic is saying, you should feel that way. You always fail at things. And then my healthy, caring adult character is going to say to the inner critic, first of all, you can't talk to my inner child that way. It's cruel and unnecessary. So you can't do that. No. Secondly, again, if I listen to you, I wouldn't get anything done. So you're not really welcome here. Inner child, you don't have to feel inadequate, because we're accomplishing a lot of other wonderful things, and you're getting to do those things too. And it's fantastic.
I want to say that for people who are listening, the book comes with some really well-developed exercises.
There you go.
That include things like that you're just talking about right now, like ways to practice with your modes, a schema chart, looking at your 5 core emotional needs, which in the book are identified as safety, love, and care, self-confidence and a sense of identity, validated feelings and needs, loving discipline and limits, joy, playfulness, and creativity, and give you an opportunity to practice some of these things that Richard is talking about. And, personally, when I work with my clients, I do find that practice is one of the most important things. Hey, Richard, we have a question from Karen that is asking you if you're writing any novels right now. Karen says she knows this is a passion of yours.
Well, Karen, you know so much about me. Yeah, I'm actually writing. I've been involved in writing a novel for a while now. I have a certificate in novel writing from San Diego's Writers Inc., a local writing organization. So thanks for asking me, Karen. And I have learned a lot about creativity and being an artist, and the struggles with mood and self-criticism, and when you're trying to create something, how the neuroscience of creativity can get in our way, right? And the little exercise, the journaling exercise that I used, has been immensely helpful with that. But I'm also trying to fit that multiplicity of mind model into the way I'm writing my characters too. So we'll see.
Well, I guess having a background in schema therapy, you'd be
Mm,
thinking about pretty complex characters because, we're very layered and complex as human beings. And even with, when I look at the schemas and I think, well, sometimes we can have pretty heavy loadings on quite a few schemas at the very same time that
yeah.
are playing into really complex behavioral responses to life situations. So, it's hard to look at a circumstance that might be difficult or challenging with clear and fresh eyes if you've got 5 schemas that are getting in the way of you kind of looking at your life clearly. So I'm sure that creates a very rich character development. Somebody's also talking about your love of film and film producing and wonders if you have any films or TV in the works.
Wow, people are reading my webpage. I appreciate it, everybody. No, novel writing is my way of sort of approaching storytelling now. But I do love cinema, and I talk about movies with my clients, and we use examples from movies sometimes in our clinical work together. And, you know, doing imagery rescripting, like taking a memory from your childhood and then bringing another character in, like adult you, in meeting, let's say 6-year-old you is getting bullied. Imagine adult you coming into that scene and being a friend to 6-year-old you. It's like a movie. And so I work on those kinds of movies with my clients. We put it that way.
Oh, that sounds really powerful, and I'm sure it
Mm,
gets well received because as soon as you bring something into action,
mm-hmm.
it changes it from something that we have to face alone. In a lot of clinical work, I see that people feel like they've had to face so many of the struggles they've had in life on their own. So all of a sudden, you're working with a skilled therapist who said,
Yep,
no, let's bring it into the room and actually do it in real time.
that's
And
right.
what's that like?
And that gets on a really core point of the change theory of schema therapy. Okay. It is, it's not just thinking about stuff. It's an old criticism of therapy, right? I can talk all about my problems, but they're not changing. The key is understanding the brain's role in change. And um, so the exercises that we do, coming back to Ken's point, practicing putting a schema into words, putting it into your words, making it what a character might say in a script, right? And then playing the role of your healthy, caring adult and responding in words. It's like you're talking to another person. And what I tell people in my book is do it out loud. Um, I forget if it was Rita who asked, or no, it was Francis maybe who asked whether it sounds like you're crazy. Well, okay, do this in privacy when you're talking out loud and practicing. But from a neuroscience perspective, if you're speaking out loud, it operates with a different part of your brain. It has a connection between the amygdala and the prefrontal cortex that's more effective than just thinking. All right. Even writing in dialogue has that effect. Okay. Doing the experiential work we do and that I do in the book with memories and with images works with a part of the brain that is more directly connected to the amygdala and eventually the vagus nerve in our body in a way that just thinking about it doesn't work. Right. So if I have a exercise that someone does for homework for therapy and they say, well, I didn't do it, but I thought about it, I'll say, okay, that's fine. Thinking about it is a good first step. How do we get to doing it? Because that's where the change happens. All right. Did I answer your question, Anna, about
Yeah,
doing
so
it? Okay.
so that kind of hooks into another question, which is a client who is asking, or rather, somebody who is actually asking, and this comes from Steve. So thank you for sending in this email, Steve. Interesting guest today.
Thank you,
Can
Steve.
can someone do schema without a therapist? And you're referring to your book and how you actually encourage people to do these exercises in a very real way out loud, reading the book, following the exercises, and really, really getting into that. Can you talk a little bit about what people are experiencing when they're reading the book?
Yeah, and again, the key word is experiencing. I say, I think in the introduction, like I know a lot of people have exercises in their self-help books, and I do it too. Like I'll read through them, and I say, you got to do these exercises. You can't just read them; you got to practice them. And so, all of for schema therapy, and my goal in writing this book was for my clients to have a handbook for their work with me, but also for it to be a standalone experience, right? Is it therapy? I would say it's self-help, right? Um, Therapy is having another person who can hear parts of you or experience parts of you that maybe you're not so aware of, and they help you become more self-aware. And sometimes when we're dealing with an anxiety, depression, personality disorder traits, we do need someone else, right? I say, if you're not sure, give it a try and see how far you get. And if you're hitting really tough experiences, then it might be a good idea to get in touch with a therapist. I think you don't necessarily need a schema therapist to do this work. You can say, I got the self-help book, I'm doing it, and they can help you. I know Psychology Today in Canada has schema therapy as a search function on their Find a Therapist guide. Canada's full of great schema therapists, obviously in the States. But it depends on the challenge you're taking on. If it's major depression, if it's something that you have worked on with a therapist before, then it's likely that you would want a therapist. But I don't think there's any harm in giving this a try, as long as you're aware of, that element of whether you're meeting those needs or whether you're hitting obstacles that are bigger than you think you can take on. Then you go out and talk to a therapist.
Mm-hmm. I want to go back to this concept of the healthy, caring adult, because, listening to you speak today, and it's been really, really interesting.
Oh, thank you.
So I so appreciate you joining us. One of the things that I was thinking about is your 6 principles of a healthy, caring adult, and you identify them as curiosity, accepting, self-advocacy, confident, protective and firm, generous, kind, and caring. And I love that you've made it so clear and explicit, because it's not always easy when somebody hasn't had the model for themselves to bring that line and to really make it real. These 6 principles mean something. They come from somewhere. And I wonder if you just help our listeners to kind of think about the healthy, caring adult mode, those 6 principles. And in your book, you have a meditation to care for modes, and maybe how that might work with bringing online the healthy, caring adult. We've got only 2 minutes left, so maybe we can wrap up with that.
All right, let's go. I love that. It's a way of connecting with your values as a person, how you think people should be treated, and also how you think you should be treated, and then treating yourself that way, right? And overcoming some of those scripts going in your head that might have come from the parenting experience that you grew up with. That, to Steve's point, it might be a time to have a therapist because they can help. Sometimes people have no idea what that's like to have a healthy, caring adult, right? And so that's why I put those principles in, to kind of help as a set of ways of looking at the healthy, caring adult. And it really comes down to being able to be a kind, accepting, curious, joyous, playful presence in your own life. And when you're caught up in your own script or caught up in a mode, and you lose the principle of multiplicity of mind, that you can change the channel, that there's always a better part of you can go to who is there waiting for you to help you. It's a totally different experience of your life that opens up a lot of potential, right? And a very reassuring experience, sometimes a very calming experience. And it's why I recommend some of these shorter exercises. You can do them every day, just as a check-in. All right. And some of the things I'm doing next, I'm getting more into somatic experiencing and doing Buddhist psychology and mindful meditation, because it's all about that. I am not the thing I feel. There's something bigger that who I am. But I hope, check out the book. And I hope for those who do try it, don't hesitate to contact me. I'm very reachable. If you want any kind of cheering on, I'd love to hear from you. And Anna, thanks so much for your time.
That's so generous. Thank you so much. Well, people who are listening, you'll know how to get in touch with us. You'll look at the blog, find Richard Brouillette's book at Your Coping Skills Aren't Working. I want to just again go back to the healthy, caring adult and the 6 principles of connecting, identifying unmet needs, explaining harm, setting limits, caring for your inner child, and promising to care. That's that commitment that we all need to make. And, it's such an interesting piece of work. And I hope that people do follow up and actually pick up the book and visit your website, where they can download many materials, including this wonderful set of exercises, and see if you can start to face yourself. It's been a pleasure. I hope everybody has a gentle day. Be well, Richard, and thank you, Gary, for producing our show today. And have a gentle day, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the Bear Psychology Show with your host, Dr. Anna Baranowski, right here on Reality Radio 101.